Welcome, everyone. The Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and Investigations will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare recesses of the subcommittee at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on the implementation of the Survivors' Bill of Rights Act, and I now recognize myself for an opening statement. This subcommittee hearing is a timely discussion about protecting and providing ample resources for victims of sexual assault. Few responsibilities weigh more heavily on this committee than the obligation to protect victims and to see to it that violent criminals are brought to justice. In 2016, the House Judiciary Committee overwhelmingly approved the Sexual Assault Survivors' Bill of Rights Act, and today we examine the efficacy of that act. The Sexual Assault Survivors' Bill of Rights Act enshrined into federal law new procedures and protections for survivors of sexual assault. Among these are the survivor's rights to a medical forensic examination, free of charge, and to be informed of any result of a sexual assault evidence collection kit, including DNA profile matches. The Act mandates preservation of rape kits for the duration of the maximum applicable statute of limitations, or up to 20 years. The Act also makes grant funding available to states providing these fundamental services to all victims. My home state of Louisiana has taken similar steps to ensure that Louisianians who are victims of sexual offenses are aware of their rights and that actions can be taken. Since the Sexual Assault Survivors' Bill of Rights Act was signed into law in 2016, 10 states have now passed Sexual Assault Survivors' Bill of Rights legislation of their own. These important policy changes would not have occurred without the tireless work of the advocates here with us today, at RISE and at RAIN, and we thank you for that. We're fortunate to have representatives of both of those organizations, and we look forward to hearing your testimony. I and this committee and this Congress offer our sincere gratitude for your efforts. The United States is a safer, more just nation because of your commitment, and we deeply appreciate that. The Chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Crime Subcommittee, Ms. Jackson Lee of Texas, for her opening statement in just a moment when she's done with her important phone call. You're recognized. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your understanding of office conversation on flooding in Houston.
Very important.
But it is not more important at this time of the hearing dealing with the oversight of the implementation of the Survivors' Bill of Rights Act of 2016. Thank you so very much for holding this important hearing on the implementation of the Survivors' Bill of Rights of 2016. This is a landmark civil rights and victims' rights legislation that established statutory rights that are specific to survivors of sexual assault and rape. This month alone, we have addressed several pieces of victim-centered legislation. We look forward to continue to do that while we seek justice for victims of sex trafficking, sexual assault, and rape. This afternoon, of course, we'll be dealing with the online sex trafficking legislation, of which I most recently met with these victims in my district and made a commitment that we want to extinguish the violence against women and others in sex trafficking, sexual assault, and rape. Research reveals that 1 in 5 college women and 1 in 16 college men are sexually assaulted while in college. Sadly, more than 90% of sexual assault victims on college campuses do not report the assault. Out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, 310 are reported to the police. As such, many serial rapists are left roaming our streets, free to wreak havoc on innocent people. Nearly 63% of men at one university whose self-reported acts qualifying as rape or attempted rape admitted to committing repeat rapes. Where the assault or rape is reported, there remains challenges because the rape kit backlog is currently one of the biggest obstacles to prosecuting perpetrators of sexual violence. Even though, as a member of this committee, I worked very diligently with my colleagues to provide funding to move that backlog along. But we must continue to address this problem at the state level in order for survivors to get their lives back on track. Statistics are disturbing. Every 98 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. Sexual assault and violence is not a gender-based crime. In fact, men, women, and children are all affected by sexual violence. However, 9 out of every 10 victims of rape are females. 1 out of every 6 American women has been the victim of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. 14.8% completed, 2.8% attempted. About 3% of American men, or 1 in 33, have experienced an attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. More alarming, for example, an estimated 80,600 inmates each year experience sexual violence while in prison or jail. 60% of all sexual violence against inmates is perpetrated by jail or prison staff, and more than 50% of the sexual contact between inmate and staff member, all of which is illegal, is non-consensual. From 2009 to 2013, Child Protective Service agencies substantiated or found strong evidence to indicate that 63,000 children a year in their custody were victims of sexual abuse. A majority of child victims are 12 to 17. Of victims under the age of 18, 34% of victims of sexual assault and rape are under age 12, and 66% of victims of sexual assault and rape are aged 12 to 17. These disturbing statistics illuminates why it is vital that states look to this federal law to establish similar measures that will curtail these shocking rape stats across our country. Given recent public attention to the issues of sexual harassment, violence, and assault, I believe this hearing is timely in order to further highlight these issues and to glean from our witnesses ways we can continue to make progress for survivors everywhere, as we did in passing the Survivors' Bill of Rights Act. I would like to thank our witnesses this morning, Becca OConnor, Vice President of Public Policy at the Rape, Abuse, Incest Nation Network. Wynne was instrumental in working with us just recently on some very crucial legislation. Amanda Wynne, CEO and founder of RISE. Lauren Libby, Chief of Staff at RISE and Survivor. And Evan Rachel Wood, artist, advocate, and survivor. I appreciate deeply your willingness to serve as witnesses in this proceeding. Look forward to hearing your testimony, applauding the victims and acknowledging the role that RAIN has played in being a forefront in the effort to end sexual violence. Commend Amanda for your valiant effort in refusing to allow the criminal justice system to win in your circumstances, and you're traveling continuously to Massachusetts just to ensure you would not be forgotten. Because of the brave, relentless, and unwavering persistence exhibited by each and every one of you at this table, the Survivor Bill of Rights came into existence. I was moved by your resilience and fierce determination in 2016 that allowed us all in Congress to examine more closely the defects and the lack of transparency. You demanded attention over the 2 years, and a bipartisan measure came out on February 23, 2016, which I'm proud to co-sponsor in the Senate and then introduce in the House in June 2016. This is very important, and of course, President Obama signed this legislation on October 7th. And we have launched, or it was launched, It's On Us initiative. So let me again continue to emphasize the importance of this legislation, the importance of the SAFER Act, the importance of the work that we're now doing to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. And I just want to make these final 2 points. To have access to your rape kit is crucial, and to have them not destroyed is crucial as well. We thank you, and we look forward to the testimony of the witnesses. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full Judiciary Committee, Mr. Goodlatte of Virginia, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to take part in this important hearing on the rights of sexual assault survivors. A little over 2 years ago, we all had the privilege of being a part of the passage of H.R. 5578, the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights Act, landmark bipartisan legislation that furthered victims' rights in the criminal justice process. This legislation assured that in federal cases, a victim would have the right to have their rape kit preserved for the duration of the statute of limitations, or up to 20 years. A victim would not have to pay for their own forensic examination. A victim would be informed of any results of their forensic examination, would be provided with written policies on forensic testing kits, and finally, would be informed before their sexual assault examination kit was destroyed and be permitted to request further preservation. These rights are now available to victims of federal crimes, but unfortunately are not consistently recognized by every state. And of course, it is the states where most sexual assault cases are prosecuted. We are grateful to welcome representatives from the nonprofits RISE and RAIN. These organizations are instrumental in raising awareness of victims' rights and spreading this message to local governments. Thus far, RISE has been able to facilitate the passage of similar laws in 10 states, a remarkable and inspiring accomplishment. Aside from statutorily enshrining rights for victims of sexual assault, this legislation also heralded the arrival of a new national movement, a movement where women feel they can report assaults without judgment and without immediate suspicion of fabrication or untoward motivations. Encouraging a culture where victims feel safe to come forward helps society by both deterring assault and assuring that predators are held accountable. I am eager to hear from our impressive witness panel about the progress that has been made over the past 2 years and what Congress can do to ensure the momentum continues. It is my hope that very soon we will see these rights established in all 50 states. Thank you for being here today, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the full Judiciary Committee ranking member, Mr. Nadler of New York, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in October of 2016, we enacted the Survivors' Bill of Rights Act, an important law to provide much-needed protections and rights to victims of sexual assault as they both seek to heal and to demand justice. This law was created because survivors' advocacy groups worked diligently to bring this issue to the attention of Congress and to guide introduction of a bill that quickly became law. These advocacy groups, such as RISE, started by Amanda Nguyen, who will testify before us today, are responsible for enlightening us as to how the treatment of the victims of rape and other sexual offenses varies from state to state. In some cases, victims feel their voices go unheard in a system that they are initially told is there to help them through the arduous and sometimes traumatic process that comes after being sexually assaulted. Victims of sexual assault are victimized again when they find themselves alone and without help to navigate policies and procedures that block their access to the justice system and thus their ability to obtain actual justice. That is why passage of the Survivors' Bill of Rights was critical. This law should help guarantee that these rights are enforced uniformly throughout the United States. Geographic location should not dictate the quality of attention or degree of information provided to victims. One of the law's most important provisions should ensure that a valuable investigative tool, commonly known as a rape kit, is always available in the investigation of a sexual assault. DNA obtained from rape kits is probably the most useful and significant piece of physical evidence in the prosecution of an offense involving non-consensual sexual contact, enabling investigators and prosecutors to link perpetrators to their crimes. Under this law, survivors have the right to completion of a rape kit free of cost, the right to preservation of their rape kit until the statute of limitations for prosecution expires or for 20 years, and the right to notification of the results of the rape kit. I note that for many years, I have fought to reduce the backlog of untested rape kits, participating in efforts to enact the Debbie Smith Act, which has been instrumental in helping to address this problem. I am heartened that the Survivors' Bill of Rights has done even more to encourage the proper use of this important tool for solving these horrible crimes. In addition, the Survivors' Bill of Rights was enacted with the goal of ensuring that victims are included in the investigation of their cases, that their input will be required and respected, and that they will remain informed and involved. When we extended these rights under federal law, we hoped that it would serve as a catalyst for state legislatures to adopt similar laws to ensure uniform treatment of sexual assault victims in state courts as well. Indeed, we have seen the enactment of a number of such state statutes and the introduction of such bills in many other states. Today, we welcome our panel of witnesses to share with us their insights into the implementation of this law, how states are progressing in changing their laws, and what remains to be done to assist survivors of sexual assault. I look forward to our discussion of these important issues, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Without objection, other members' opening statements will be made a part of our record today. We have a very distinguished panel today, and I begin by swearing in our witnesses before introducing each of them. If you would, please all rise, no pun intended. Raise your right hand, if you will. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give before this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that all the witnesses responded in the affirmative. You may now be seated. Thank you. Our first witness is actually the second witness today. We got these out of order. We just changed it, I know. Is Amanda Wynne. Ms. Wynne is the CEO and founder of RISE, a national civil rights nonprofit working to protect rape survivors. Right before she goes will be Ms. Evan Rachel Wood, a well-known artist and advocate who herself is a survivor of rape. Our third witness is Ms. Lauren Libby, who is the Chief of Staff of RISE and is also a survivor. And our fourth witness is Ms. Becca OConnor. She's the Vice President of Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network that we know as RAIN. Each of the witnesses' written statements will be entered into the record in their entirety, and I ask that each witness summarize her testimony in 5 minutes or less. To help you stay within that time, there's a timing light right in front of you. The light will turn from green to yellow, indicating that you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. And when the light turns red, it indicates that a witness's 5 minutes have expired. I now recognize our first witness. We'll go in this order. Ms. Wood, if you would. Thank you. 5 minutes.
Ranking Member Jackson Lee and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Evan Rachel Wood, and I'm an artist, but I am also a domestic violence and sexual assault survivor and the single mother of a young boy. When I was 5 years old, I started working in film, and every day since then, I've worked to reach the very privileged place I'm aware that I occupy. And I'm here today to use my position as an artist, survivor, mother, and advocate to bring a human voice to the population of 25 million survivors in the U.S. who are currently experiencing inequality under the law and who desperately need basic civil rights. I struggle to speak to you today because I'm not sure what words are appropriate when discussing this issue. However, if you can't hear the whole truth, you will never know true empathy, and I believe in the saying, if we have to live through it, then you should have to hear it. This past year and the massive movements such as Me Too and Time's Up have been extremely empowering and validating for survivors, but also incredibly painful. While no one had to tell me that rape was such a worldwide epidemic, to see the flood of stories so similar to my own was both freeing and soul-crushing. Waves of memories and detail came flooding into my brain every time I read the words. I froze. I thought I was the only human who experienced this, and I carried so much guilt and confusion about my response to the abuse. I accepted my powerlessness, and I felt I deserved it somehow. Why? There are two specific instances of sexual assault and violence I've experienced that really stick out in my mind. In fact, they are burned into my brain, branded there for life, a mental scar that I feel every day. My experience with domestic violence was this: toxic mental, physical, and sexual abuse, which started slow but escalated over time, including threats against my life, severe gaslighting and brainwashing, waking up to the man that claimed to love me raping what he believed to be my unconscious body. And the worst part, sick rituals of binding me up by my hands and feet to be mentally and physically tortured until my abuser felt I had proven my love for them. In this moment, while I was tied up and being beaten and being told unspeakable things, I truly felt like I could die, not just because my abuser said to me, I could kill you right now, but because in that moment I felt like I left my body and I was too afraid to run. He would find me. I froze, and it was as if I could see myself from the outside, and for the first time in months, I felt something, utter shame and despair. I had no idea what to do to change my situation, so I went numb, and soon I couldn't feel anything. I wasn't alive. My self-esteem and spirit were broken. I was deeply terrified, and that fear lives with me to this day. What makes me more hurt and more angry than the actual rape and abuse itself was that piece of me that was stolen, which altered the course of my life. Because of this abuse, my already spiritless person, when I was pushed onto the floor of a locked storage closet by another attacker after hours at a bar, my body instinctively knew what to do: disappear, go numb, make it go away. Being abused and raped previously made it easier for me to be raped again, not the other way around. And not a day goes by when I don't hear the words this man whispered into my ear over and over: you're going to be fine, you're going to be fine, you're going to be fine. And then my small voice sang back, no, 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 until it faded into nothing. And I remember the feeling of shutting down or freezing and utter shock taking over, and I couldn't even make a sound. I felt a piece of me disappear, a piece that has never returned. In other words, I was not fine, and I am not fine. I was told the signs. My mother is also a survivor, but even she couldn't protect her daughter from the messages women and men are fed by society that plays a role in determining our fate, or the dark magic of gaslighting. Sometimes we are pushed down not just by our attackers, but held there by the knowledge that there may be no safe place to go. The aftermath of rape is a huge part of the conversation that needs much more attention, and in this case, I can speak from my own experiences. So often we speak of these assaults as no more than a few minutes of awfulness, but the scars last a lifetime. Even though these experiences happened a decade ago, I still struggle with the aftermath. My relationship suffers, my partners suffer, my mental and physical health suffers. 7 years after my rapes, plural, I was diagnosed with long-term PTSD, which I had been living with all that time without knowledge about my condition. I simply thought I was going crazy. I struggled with depression, addiction, agoraphobia, night terrors. So many times a sleeping partner of mine has awoken to their love screaming in the night and gasping for air in a pool of sweat after having some sort of vivid dream of my abuse or hearing them say my name so loudly in my ear. The feeling of paralysis returns when there's a loud noise and I'm home alone, convinced someone is coming to hurt me. I stay awake all night clutching a baseball bat, which began to replace my distraught and absent partners as trust and touch became increasingly more difficult. I struggled with self-harm to the point of 2 suicide attempts, which landed me in a psychiatric hospital for a short period of time. And this was, however, a turning point in my life when I started seeking professional help to deal with my trauma and mental stress, but others are not so fortunate, and because of this, rape is often more than a few minutes of trauma, but a slow death. And I would like to say to my attackers that I don't hate you. I feel sorry for you. I'm not here to shame you. I want to understand you, and I want you to understand me, but you have to listen first. And this makes me think of my son and the world that he will be raised in, and the day I will have to explain to him what rape means and why it happened to his mother. And when I knew I was to become a mother, I prayed for a boy for this reason. However, I realized it could be just as easy for my son to fall prey to the lies society tells us about men. Things like they have uncontrollable impulses to hurt people, and I think that is cruel to tell a child that this is just how all men are, and it's cruel to turn a blind eye to all the ways we perpetuate this lie. So I'm also here to advocate for men and for my son, who I hope grows up knowing he's much more valuable than that, and who I can only hope I will set an example for by continuing to fight for him and myself and all the people affected by abuse, because that is our job as parents and as leaders. And above all, this starts with the rule of law, and it starts with people leading by example and coming to the aid of our girls, but also our young boys. And that's why I sit here today with Amanda and Wynne and members of the RISE team. Amanda has been so inspiring to me and energized me and made me realize that not only was change possible, that I could play a part in it. And this bill is just one step in the right direction of setting the bar higher for what's right and what the standard will be that we set for society. This, the recognition of basic civil rights for sexual assault survivors serves as a first step. It's a safety net that may help save someone's life one day. And even though we've passed this bill at a federal level, there's still work to be done. And in order to ensure that all survivors are protected under that law, we need to pass the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights in all 50 states. We've done this in 9 so far, and it's our job to make sure that survivors in the remaining 41 are treated with the same humanity and dignity. And this is called progress, and it starts here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. I now recognize our...
Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Nadler.
I neglected to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter from Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, without objection.
Thank you.
Now recognize our second witness, Ms. Wynne, and push that microphone button as you get started. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman, ranking member, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today to discuss the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights Act. My name is Amanda Wynne, and I never thought that I'd be made to suffer a greater injustice than what I went through on the day that I was raped. Growing up, I believed in those familiar American promises that our rights were sacred, that everyone was equal in the eyes of the law, and that the legal system existed to right wrongs and restore justice. It was only after my rape that I discovered firsthand the ways in which rape survivors are continually re-victimized and betrayed by our country's failure to make good on these promises. When I went to research my options, I discovered huge irregularities and shortfalls in the civil rights available to survivors. Some states destroy untested rape kits before the statute of limitations. Other states deny survivors a copy of their police report or medical records. Some don't even tell survivors what rights they have. I realized that I had a choice: accept the injustice or take change into my own hands. And so, with your help, I decided to rewrite the law. I founded a team called RISE, and together we organized and did the impossible. we helped draft and unanimously passed the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights Act. The law, signed by President Obama on October 7th, 2016, codifies a basic set of comprehensive civil rights for at least 25 million rape survivors in this country. Before RISE came along, only 20 bills, or 0.016%, in modern US history had passed through Congress with unanimous support. Ours became the 21st. I remember when I couldn't get anyone's attention on this issue. In this very hall outside here, poured my heart out to an intern for 5 minutes in the hallway. Now I'm returning to these same halls today, with you listening here, having won my fight. And it's a full circle, and we've come a long way. But the fight isn't over yet. There's a long, rich tradition of activism in America, of people taking their painful living truths and channeling it into justice. And I choose to join that tradition by penning my own civil rights into existence because I believe in America and because my theory of change is that hope is contagious. I'm helping others pen their own civil rights into existence too. And inspired by what we've done here, survivors and allies and public servants in 41 states have organized to fight to build on these rights in their home communities. That has resulted in the creation of 10 new state laws in 12 months and 1 international law in Japan. That's a total of 12 laws in 12 months. I know firsthand the failings of the American justice system, but I also know the change that ordinary Americans can bring. After all, I lived it. And here's what I learned. No one is powerless when we come together. And no one can make us invisible when we demand to be seen. On one of my trips to Washington, my Uber driver and I rode in silence until he asked me why I was going to Congress. And when I told him, this huge stoic man began tearing up, and he said, "My daughter is a rape survivor. The police asked her what she was wearing and if she was drinking and blaming her. The system isn't working." And when the car stopped, he asked to shake my hand and thanked me for fighting for his daughter. We are all living in this collective story. It is a narrative of progress. Most rape cases are adjudicated in state courts. That's why we need to pass these rights on the state level. The federal bill is a model for states to follow. 9 states have, but we still have 41 states to go. And I urge anyone listening here today to join RISE and this movement at risenow.us. We need to pass these rights state by state. I see progress every day when I go to work with risers, survivors, and allies across the country, across party lines, who fight to deepen the meaning of freedom to form a more perfect union. These people prove that while hope and change can be inspired by our leaders, they must be made real by ordinary citizens standing up. They are the perfect example of why our country has hope. And I celebrate that they are met with a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wynne. I now recognize our third witness, Ms. Libby.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you so much for having me testify today to discuss the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights. I myself am a survivor of 2 sexual assaults. However, like many of the 25 million survivors in the United States, both of my rapes occurred before the passage of this act, and I was unable to seek justice through the criminal justice system. My work on this legislation will have no impact on my rape cases. However, what I wish to speak to you about today has little or nothing to do with my rape. In the winter of 2015, while I was sitting at my desk at work, I sent out an email to Amanda and Wynne, simply asking her, what can I do to help? I had no background in politics. The last time I had spoken publicly about something was in my 8th grade school play. However, in a matter of days, with Amanda encouragingly sitting on the phone with me, I was speaking with Massachusetts legislators, explaining to them why we needed to preserve rape kits for at least 15 years. As a rape survivor, I've seen how policies hindered me from seeking justice and from protecting other women from my rapists. However, by working with RISE, I also came to realize that I had the power to change these policies. In other words, RISE transformed me from a rape survivor into an organizer with a powerful voice. In the following months, I worked with Amanda and our small team of organizers to move our survivor bill through the Massachusetts State House. In October of 2016, I watched as the same sexual assault survivor bill of rights was signed into federal law. A mere week later, Governor Baker signed the same legislation codifying civil rights in the same state where I had been raped. In less than a year, I had helped pass 2 laws. What happened from then on was nothing short of extraordinary. Amanda encouraged me and the other members of the RISE team to become organizing coaches. As requests from survivors and legislators and allies came pouring in, I began working with new volunteers, or risers as we call them, guiding them through the process of penning their own civil rights into existence. The pride that I felt upon the passage of my own Massachusetts bill somehow doubled as I witnessed some of our first risers speak on the California State Assembly floor to advocate for their own civil rights and eventually pass their own laws. 3 weeks ago, one of our survivors and one of our risers spoke at a press conference in front of legislators from New York State to announce the creation of a new bill that would amend New York's evidence retention laws from 30 days, the worst in the nation, to 20 years. In total, RISE has passed 12 laws for 9 states and 2 countries, the United States and Japan. It is rare that advocates have the opportunity to work on a piece of legislation and see it pass into law. Now imagine being able to replicate that experience to help organizers pass this same legislation in 9 states over. That's the sort of impact our risers have been able to create over the past 2 years. My undying resolve towards passing this Bill of Rights and belief in the transformative power that these rights can bring stems back to my experience working on this same federal bill right here in this very building. I remember sitting with a group of survivors in the Rayburn cafeteria, waiting for our next meeting with members of House Judiciary. As we huddled around a table, one woman, a survivor like myself, turned to me and said, "I don't know if you feel this way, but when I heard about the Survivor Bill of Rights, that was the first time I felt hope. That was the first time since my sexual assault that I felt that things could change for the better." This statement sticks with me because it perfectly encapsulates how I feel and how I felt the first time I began working on this legislation. When I saw Congress vote unanimously to pass the Survivor Bill of Rights, I realized that this bill was more than just policy. By passing this bill as model legislation for the rest of the country, the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights Act represents the possibility for change. This idea drives me to work on legislation every single day. By passing this bill, Congress has provided the rest of the nation with a blueprint for hope. This is what will guide organizers and legislators forward as we move to pass this legislation in the remaining 41 states. And we thank you so much for your work.
Thank you, Ms. Libby. You've come a long way since the school play. Now recognize our 4th and final witness, Ms. O'Connor, for 5 minutes.
I wasn't a theater kid. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, thank you for the hearing today and for the opportunity to address you about this important legislation. I'm Becca OConnor, the Vice President of Public Policy at RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, which is the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization and runs the National Sexual Assault Hotline. Additionally, we run the DoD Safe Helpline. The hotline has helped more than 2.5 million victims of sexual assault. Every 2 minutes, an American experiences sexual assault. And despite progress, this remains a crime where all too often only the victim pays a price. In fact, sex offenders are less likely to go to prison than those who commit robbery. This is particularly troubling when we consider that rapists are very often serial perpetrators. A chief challenge for us in fighting to end sexual violence is low reporting rates. Just 2/3 of these crimes are reported to police, with many victims citing systemic distrust as the reason they remain silent. We can do better, and enactment and implementation of this law is a great first step. We hope and anticipate that, as in the past, with efforts like OVC's Vision 21 initiative and BJA's Sexual Assault Kit initiative, government leaders will seize the opportunity this law presents to memorialize, enforce, and continue to advance expert-informed, evidence-based policy proposals. We endorse this legislation because of our commitment to creating a system where more victims and survivors will feel comfortable coming forward and supported doing so, and report the crimes and hold perpetrators accountable. Among other things, this bill reinforces the right of a survivor of sexual violence to receive a free medical forensic exam or rape exam. Congress has long demonstrated an understanding of why this is important, for instance, in VAWA. Importantly, the medical treatment rendered in the course of these exams can be a crucial factor in a victim's immediate and long-term healing and recovery. Time and again, we hear from survivors about the expert care of SANES and what it meant to their healing in the aftermath of trauma. Also importantly, the forensic evidence collection component of these exams can be the difference between a conviction and a rapist walking free. During the exam, a victim's body is a crime scene from which the evidence is painstakingly collected. SANES document injuries and other indicators of assault, including drugging, to support identifying the perpetrator. And despite the seemingly universal acknowledgement that we should never let cost be a barrier to these universal systems, these critical services, challenges remain. Recently, the New York State Attorney General opened an investigation that revealed billing errors related to rape exams at in-state hospitals. The results? Administrators at those hospitals are cutting checks for victims now. Again, we can and must do better if we hope to turn the tide and build victim trust in this system. To that end, we encourage the working group created by this act to prioritize practices and reforms that will ensure a free rape exam is not only a right on paper, but in practice. In addition, we owe it to survivors to dig in on the issues of SANE access and to make sure that the quality of care a victim receives is not a matter of lucky geography. On another note, statutes of limitations were put into place in part to discourage convictions based on unreliable witness testimony, including memories of events that occurred years in the past. With advancements such as DNA, evidence that in fact withstands the test of time is increasingly available. And yet we still hear heartbreaking stories about survivors coming forward to report and learning that their kid has been destroyed before the SOL has expired. What message does this send to survivors? What message to potential rapists? This law takes an important step, establishing the survivor's right to request the evidence be preserved for the shorter of either the statute of limitations or 20 years. Notably, this aligns with the 2017 Justice Department recommendation. That said, lawmakers across America are actively evaluating their statutes of limitations for sex crimes, and many, as we've recommended, have eliminated the SOL on felony-level sex offenses. The majority of states toll the statute of limitations when DNA is available. Such reforms reflect the reality that sex crimes are often complicated, their investigations and prosecutions complex and drawn out, and survivors can take time to come forward. While we applaud this law insofar as it's a strong step forward, we respectfully implore the working group established under the Act to revisit the issue in light of the shifting national landscape and consider the added benefits of revising this right to have the evidence retained for a minimum of 20 years. Since the national sweep of the Me Too movement last fall, the National Hotline has been overwhelmed with calls for help and support. Last month, RAIN's victim service programs helped more than 27,800 survivors, up 47% from the prior year. Some visitors have waited 3 hours to talk to our staff, and that's when we added staff to make sure we could meet demand. The 209,480 survivors helped in 2017 was the most for any year since our founding in 1994. This trend represents, in some ways, good news. More victims are reaching out. It also underscores just how important it is to work together to make sure that the promise of this law, which is a model for states, is fulfilled. I thank you and look forward to further discussion.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connor, and thank all of you for your bravery today and for your testimony. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions from the members of the committee, and I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. First question is for Ms. Wynne. You've talked about, we referenced today the 41 states that have yet to fully comply with the Survivors' Bill of Rights. The question is, what does your organization see as the biggest obstacle to implementing these changes in those 41 states?
Thank you, Chairman, for your question. Honestly, all the 12 laws we've passed have been unanimous. So it isn't about partisanship. The greatest challenge that we face is ignorance. People just don't know how broken the criminal justice system is for rape survivors. And as soon as they hear about it, they say, well, how is this still a thing? And the good news is that we have a thing that people can work on. That's what the United States Congress demonstrated by unanimously passing the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights Act. And that's what we want state legislators across America to see, so that no survivor can be left with inequality under the law.
So is there a part or certain parts of the Survivors' Bill of Rights that you see states comply with more frequently? I mean, are some doing it piecemeal, so to speak?
So, thank you for your question, Chairman. There is no one-size-fits-all. This federal law is a model for states, but of course, states vary from the resources that they have, even within their state, county to county. So my answer to that question is that all states can do better, and that we're very grateful for the chance to talk about that today.
I think highlighting it is important, and it is always a balance and a competition for resources because they're scarce, as we know. That's the big challenge. How have you seen, you've traveled around quite a bit, sounds like, last couple years here. How have you seen the public respond overall to the passage of the Bill of Rights?
Well, thank you for your question. It has honestly been one of the greatest moving moments to see how people have responded to this. I think it is so rare for any advocates to ever have a vision, see it enacted, and then also see the consequences of it. I'm talking about specifically survivors who were raped after the federal law passed or their state laws passed and were able to access civil rights because of what we've done here. They were able to access justice. In this hearing today, being able to share with you, that's probably the closest I'll ever get to justice. But there are so many others who don't have to go through what I had to go through. And the response has been incredible. That's why we've had an unprecedented movement, 12 laws in a year. That's an average of a law a month.
Thank you for that. Ms. O'Connor, a couple for you, and your testimony is great. Wanted to highlight a couple of things just for the record in the Q&A. You said in your testimony that, quote, unfortunately, we do still hear stories about victims who have come forward seeking justice within the statute of limitations only to learn that their rape kit was destroyed, unquote. Why is that still happening, and what can we do about it on state level?
Thank you for the question. I don't mean to repeat what Amanda said, but the answer is it varies from place to place. Ultimately, I think we have done such a tremendous job in the past decade plus, especially with leadership from many of you on this committee, to educate people about the power of DNA in these cases, about the fact that it is one of the most powerful tools we have against rape. I mean, just even letting someone, an accused individual, know that DNA evidence exists in their case can lead to a plea, and we save the agony of trial for a survivor and the cost. But I think ultimately that groundwork that Amanda and others are doing is critical, that we are traveling to the states, we are educating people about that impact and why, you know, sometimes it's a resource issue. We're not blind to that. We recognize that there are storage challenges and the logistics of these things. But ultimately, once you sit with someone and talk through the pros and cons here, I think it's pretty easy to see why the cost of storing a rape kit is outweighed by the public safety interest in an individual's healing.
We just have to keep making that case, I guess, right? Last question, because I'm almost out of time. Since we passed the Survivors' Bill of Rights, there's been a measurable increase in sexual assault prosecutions, I think, and survivors making use of the legal changes. Can you highlight a couple of those just in the seconds that we have remaining?
Sure. I can speak to the fact that, first of all, we've heard on the hotline from many, many individuals. We often hear, this is the first time I've ever told anyone, right? And these are individuals that are reaching out at all hours of the night. We have staff 24/7. It's free. It's confidential. And many of them have cited, too, things like the Me Too movement as the impetus for reaching out and learning about these issues. That's a first step, and I think that being greeted by a society that is elevating these issues in the way that we did by passing this law and related efforts on the state level, we're giving them permission to engage and to trust the system and to approach law enforcement with a new mindset. And in the same way that seeing rather horrifying headlines about rape kits being stored in warehouses to the ceiling can have a chilling effect, efforts like this that normalize their experience and demonstrate that we're listening and we're working on systemic reform make all the difference in the world.
Thank you for that. I'm out of time. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for her questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. This is both joyful and sobering. We are the most powerful nation in the world, and I hope that conversations of this past year or statements of this past year relating to the need to be great does not diminish the fact that the world views us as the greatest nation in the world. And if we think of the people in this nation, and I'm sure many that you have met, who, unlike the rapists, comforted you, stood with you. With the people of this nation, we are the greatest country in the world. For that reason, I think we should, as we are doing on the floor of the House this afternoon on the question of human trafficking, really make a commitment, whether it's societal ills, law enforcement, the wrong techniques, to be able to extinguish the need, the desire, the repetitiveness of rape. There is something about society accepting it and not realizing the pain. So let me, first of all, thank Evan Rachel Wood. I don't think anyone can listen without being gut-wrenched, gut-kicked. Amanda Wynne, who's gone around the world and took pain. I think it's great to have a conversation with a Uber driver. That's the way you get the message out. He'll talk about that the rest of the time. And Lauren, thank you so very much. I joined the chairman in saying that it's a mighty powerful statement. Rebecca, let me just say I was on the floor, I guess, a week before last, again, without joy, but thanking Rain for giving the courage to those athletes. I have in my constituency a wonderful young woman, Simone Biles, and we were together that week, and the courage to share in your own neighborhood, as these athletes had to share in their own neighborhood. Everyone knows that Rain was very instrumental in giving the strength for the testimony against the doctor in Michigan. I refuse to call the name, but in any event, I think that we saw a point in history of relief. So my commitment is to learn every day the way to extinguish, take a sledgehammer, not to the human beings, but to understand how we learn rape or accept rape or have it in our society. With that in mind, I'm interested, and I'll go to each of you as to one single thing you want us to take away from this. But before I ask that question, I'd like to ask Amanda, has the working group been established that was supposed to be established in the Attorney General's office?
Thank you, member, for your question, and thank you for listening to our stories today. I need to go find that Uber driver. I have not heard from the Department of Justice about a working group session, and I want to learn about what is going on there. I want this bill to be implemented, or law to be implemented, so that we can have enforcement. And I look forward to working with you, with your office, and with any member to explore how we can do that with this working group.
Well, let me first of all acknowledge the members on my side and join with the members here on the other side of the aisle, Ms. Val Demings, our ranking member, Mr. Nadler, Mr. Ted Lieu, and there are others enthusiastically, I believe, will join in a letter and effort to determine what is established the working group, and I certainly seek the collaboration of my friends and colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We will get this ignited. I can say to you there's some deadening silence, and let me not attribute anything other than we just forgot. I'm so glad you're here so that it will not be forgotten, and we make that promise to you. In these few seconds, can I quickly get from each of you one thing that should be taken away from this meeting, this hearing?
Thank you for the question. I think it's not just one thing, it's so many things. And we all have to work together to fix all the many things. I hope my testimony explains and paints a better picture of what rape is like and also the aftermath and how it can stay with you for the rest of your life and the extremely high medical bills that also come with that, and the trauma counseling and it affecting your relationships, it affecting your sleep, it affecting your health. It's not just an isolated incident. It carries on, and I think from what I have experienced, I hope we can find a way to teach our women to not go inward and make everything their fault and take things out on themselves. And I hope we can teach men to express themselves better and to not take things out on other people, because I think that's part of the problem that I see. And I think that's a societal problem, and it's going to take a shift of consciousness and us adults being able to have conversations about sexual intercourse and what the healthy versions of that look like. Because I think if we don't know that, then we definitely won't know what the bad versions are like either.
Thank you.
So that's what I would like.
Lauren, anything you want us to take one thing?
Thank you, member. I think what I really want to highlight today is the power of our organizers and of advocates, of survivors who come together and who are able to create a collective voice to create change. This legislation means so much in the fact that so many other states have adopted it. We were speaking with a senator from West Virginia who was so inspired by this bill. He worked with survivors who he had formerly worked with as a prosecutor in the state to get the bill passed unanimously through the Senate in West Virginia. We are so proud that this has happened, and we think that, we have so many more states to go, but this is absolutely a momentous movement, and we will get there, I think, in a very short time.
Thank you. If you want to ask the questions in another round of questions, I'll yield back at this time. Thank you so very much for your testimony and passion, and so sorry for your experience. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady, and the chair recognizes a gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. We appreciate so much your being here. It cannot be a pleasant experience going back and having to dredge up what was so horribly painful previously. And I've been a prosecutor in early life and also a felony judge. And Lauren, Ms. Libby, and I'd read your statement. I'd read each of the statements, and I'd had to step out at a conflicting meeting with some other judges who are still judges about some victims' issues. But you had said in your statement, I was unable to seek justice through the criminal justice system, and this legislation had not been passed. Was that to do with the rape kit, or what prevented the prosecution?
So that's a great question. Thank you so much, member. It was a really difficult period for me to come forward and seek justice. After my first assault, which happened on a college campus, I met with my Title IX officer. And she said I could get a rape kit done and I could go through the process of bringing a case forward, but she advised me not to.
She advised you not to?
She said...
Did she give a reason?
Yeah, of course. She was worried it would be too painful for me. She realized that the process of getting a rape kit done, which can take up to 7 hours, only to have your rape kit destroyed after 6 months, is more traumatic, or what could be more traumatic.
Oh, the rape kits where you were being destroyed after 6 months at that point, is that right?
Yes, that's actually why Amanda founded RISE.
And that's what I understood about RISE. It's been extremely helpful in pushing legislation to make sure they're around.
Yeah, and I would absolutely be happy to defer this statement to Amanda, because this exact issue is why we even created these laws.
Yeah, and Ms. Wynne, you want to follow up on that? Obviously, this is something I'm a little surprised to hear. Was the rape counselor female, Ms. Libby?
She was. She was female, and she was doing this to look out for my own mental health and protection. And at the time,
well, that is catch-22. I mean, to pursue justice, it is going to be painful. And then we have the constitutional right to confront our accusers. But then for somebody who's been through something just so horrifying that even the thought of it sends them into convulsions, makes it pretty tough. But Ms. Wynne, was this pretty common? Did you find this across the country that, first of all, rape kits were only being kept 6 months? How persuasive was the 6-month keeping of rape kits?
Well, thank you so much for your question, member. Yes, unfortunately, rape kits are being destroyed before they're tested, before the statute of limitations ends across the country. In fact, that's why we're fighting so hard for this now. The federal law impacts rape cases that are adjudicated in federal court, and most rape cases are adjudicated in state courts. In fact, New York State, as Lauren mentioned, is the worst in the country. It destroys rape kits in 30 days.
Wow.
Yes, in 30 days.
Yeah, I have it in my mind, you know, even if you don't find, I mean, in cases where the perpetrator is unknown, if you got a rape kit, I wouldn't mind seeing those kept beyond the statute of limitations, just because they may be found in some other case,
yes,
and then the DNA matches,
yes,
and then you could use that prior rape to help prove the one that wasn't beyond the, so I'm
exactly.
even a little concerned about just getting rid of them at the end of the limitations period. Those could be immensely helpful, it
yes.
would seem.
Yeah, that would be the ideal. And to harken back to your point earlier, there are so many survivors across the country that are afraid of going through the criminal justice system because they feel that they could be re-victimized going through it again. I remember when I first sought legal counsel, the woman on the phone told me something similar. She said, look, you have every right to go through this justice system, but I just want to tell you, it's going to be really hard, and I don't know if it's worth it. The system is set up as a Kafkaesque labyrinth, And I understood that firsthand when I discovered that Massachusetts, where my rape was, would destroy my kid in 6 months. Now that's not the case because our law has passed there in Massachusetts.
Well, my time is up, but Ms. Wood, Ms. O'Connor, I didn't get a chance to speak to you, but let me just thank each of you. And I understand Ms. Wood, Ms. Wynne, Ms. Libby, I can't fully appreciate what you've been through. And I noted, one commented in a statement that, it was tough. I blame myself. I just want to take a point of personal privilege to say to you what I used to say to victims after the trial was over. You understand that nothing that happened was your fault, right? You understand that. This was not your fault. You were a victim, and any idea that, gee, I may have deserved it, I may have gotten what I deserved, I was asking for it, that is BS. That should have no application ever again in your lives. And I appreciate what you're doing, because what you're doing will help us stop other victims down the road. So thank you. I applaud your courage in coming forward. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman from Texas. You do have some strong advocates in New York, and one is up next, Mr. Nadler, the gentleman from New York, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here and for sharing your very personal stories with us. I can only imagine how difficult, and I can see on your faces, how difficult that is. And we appreciate your willingness to speak up and speak out and the work you've done. And I want to make sure we do everything we can to further these efforts. So thank you again for your testimony. And before I go to the questions I was going to ask, I was just, I worked with Wynne about 15, 16 years ago on legislation to get rape kits tested and so forth. And I'm glad that the Bill of Rights that we passed is getting states to pass laws on rape kits. My question is, first with respect to New York, which only requires that rape kits be kept for 30 days, what's this? Is anybody offered legislation in the legislature there to deal with this?
Yeah, actually, thank you so much, member, for your question. We really appreciate it. 3 weeks ago, we had a press conference because Senator Hannan had introduced and passed a piece of legislation through the Senate Health Committee that specifically recommended that rape kits be retained for at least 20 years. There's no statute of limitations on sexual assault.
And is there companion legislation in the Assembly?
We will be introducing companion legislation in the Assembly. Yeah.
Okay. Now, are there, ask any of you, are there additional rights that you think should be added to the federal statute? Or is the federal statute fine as it is?
Thank you so much for your question. I think this issue can always be improved. The Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights was written to be a first step solution, an attempt to make some form of leveling so that survivors, accused, people who touch the criminal justice system all have a fair shot at the criminal justice system. At the core of it is that survivors never should have justice be dependent on geography, that two different survivors in two different states shouldn't have two completely different sets of rights. But I do look forward to what member Sheila Jackson-Lee had mentioned before in the working group letter, and I so greatly appreciate that you're having this hearing so that this issue is not forgotten.
And as far as specific recommendations for additions to the federal statute go, do you have any? Or you're talking about the working group?
I think that, Rebecca, you had mentioned a couple great pieces of legislation, and so I'd like to defer to Rebecca on this.
Okay.
Thanks, Amanda. I would just say that our recommendations are to complement and strengthen the rights that are already written within the law. And I do think that, in a prior life I worked in Massachusetts for the agency that enforced the Victim Bill of Rights. And what we did in 2004 on the 20th anniversary of that law was similar to what Vision 21 did at OVC for the nation. We evaluated whether or not we were keeping pace with the landscape and victims' needs. We identified whether or not technology, for instance, could be embodied into that law so that testimony could be offered in new ways, in a way that balanced victims' rights and defendants' rights. So in addition to the recommendations I made in my oral statement, I would say there's, as Amanda said, always room for improvement. I don't have a specific set of ideas to offer at this time, but I do think, again, it's our hope that the working group that's formed under this act will take that on.
Let me just ask one final question. We've spoken of statute of how long you keep a rape kit, but has the enactment of the Survivors' Bill of Rights impacted the effort to reduce the backlog of untested rape kits? In other words, has it dealt with the other end of the problem?
So I don't have data that demonstrates a causal effect here, but what I can say is that, insofar as this has encouraged more survivors to come forward and have a rape kit done and thereby initiate or engage with the system, that's a positive step. In our work as part of the training and technical assistance team for the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, we're traveling the country to talk to sites that are working to clear their backlogs. And I think that the ability to invoke this statute and demonstrate that, again, quite frankly, Congress is fixing its eye on this and not abating, and that this is something that remains a priority from the national level is very helpful when we're talking in states and helping them identify ways to craft those retention policies, to craft their own in-state bills of rights. And that includes, for instance, rape kit transparency laws. Not long ago, I testified in Maryland in support of a testing bill for rape kits, and one of the changes that was made at the table, and is now part of the law, is the right to notification of certain testing results. So I think all of this seems together, and while I don't have data yet as to the tangible impact for individuals, I can say that it's definitely resonating with survivors.
Thank you very much. My time has expired, so I'll yield it back.
Thank the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes another one of our former judges, Judge Poe from Texas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you all for being here today. Your presence is impressive. Your words are even more impressive. We are truly grateful for all of you. You are some of America's best, and I mean that sincerely. As the chairman has said, I used to be a judge for 22 years at the courthouse in Houston and prosecutor before that. And y'all are so young, but there was a time when, we've come a long way. I prosecuted in the state of Texas in the 70s. The statute of limitations for rape was 1 year. Auto theft was 2 years. Survivors, when they had the courage to testify, their whole background, all of it, was admissible by the defense. And, of course, none of that was admissible against the defendant. The laws, thankfully, have changed. We have victim advocates who are in the courtroom now. We have a rape kit that was partially invented by Dr. Red Duke at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, Texas, which we thought was really the greatest thing in the world for preserving evidence in criminal cases. We have come a long way in all the states, but we've got further to go. Don't get me wrong. As my friend Judge Gohmert said, sexual assault is never the fault of the victim. Never, never the fault of the victim. It's always the fault of the perpetrator. And I think society is finally learning that and believing that and understanding that truth. I prosecuted cases, met a lot of victims, sexual assault, and as a judge too, I still get calls from them from time to time, just checking in. And it does me more good, I think, than it does them. But they have all kinds of questions, as you have had. If the perpetrator was captured, is he still in the penitentiary? Where is he if he got out? And so we fixed some of those laws, letting victims, survivors know when these guys go to penitentiary and then when they get out. So you have a right to not only know when they get out, but to go to the parole hearing if you want to. Oh, that's new. You know, it's relatively new stuff. But it's part of the victim's rights in the Bill of Rights. The backlog, as the gentleman from New York mentioned, of rape kits has got to get fixed. I'm tired of hearing excuses from law enforcement why it hadn't happened. They make lots of excuses, and they're all excuses. Get it done. Just do it. As pointed out, it solves a lot of cases, not just one, but maybe others. And it not only helps find the guilty, but it releases the innocent. So we got to get that done. No excuses by any law enforcement. I'm tired of that. And we have to make sure that states, then in a timely manner, get these tests done. It shouldn't take 7 hours to do it. Our scientific knowledge is smarter than that, and they're getting better than that. The people that figure that all out, they can do it quicker than seven hours. I do have some questions left, I think, a few minutes. Miss Libby, without, I don't need to know where you went to college, but myself and some others are intending to have a forum on sexual assault on campus, where some universities take the position, we can't tell anybody about this, especially law enforcement, because we don't want to ruin the image of the university. I'm not saying that was your situation at all, don't get me wrong, but we're going to have a hearing or a forum on this in Houston, a sexual assault on campus, and to see maybe if we can change some things to make it easier for our kids who are in university situation to get the justice they deserve as well. The one thing we're considering, besides having a victim advocate on campus for sexual assault, having a safe or a sane available where they are not available for some universities. They don't know how to deal with sexual assault. God bless them, they just don't know. So maybe we need to require that they have a sane or a safe available to make sure that these sexual assault kits are actually collected. I do have a question. I really do mean that. Ms. O'Connor, thank you for what you do in RAIN. RAIN is just great. We all love RAIN and what you do. You mentioned in your testimony that you're still hearing stories about victims who come forward seeking justice within the statute limitations only to learn that the rape kit was destroyed. What states are those happening in? I want you to be specific. Tell me the states.
I'm happy to get you that information. I don't have it with me.
Do you know any of them off the top of your head?
I do not. These are anecdotal statements that we get through the hotline. So, honestly, I know Amanda can speak to her own experience, which has now been reformed thanks to her efforts in Massachusetts, where, there are states where you have to, basically, the onus is on the victim to call and let folks know that they want their kit retained. And that's really the crux of the problem, right? We should have a presumption that that evidence is valuable not only for that individual, but for post-conviction testing.
So we just may have to pass a law saying to keep it all across the board rather than destroy evidence in a criminal case. Are you kidding me?
I think there are recommendations that came out as recently as through the NIJ Safer Working Group that you helped to make happen that recommend timelines for retention of evidence. Now, we track with those in this bill in terms of evidence prior to conviction, but I think that, again, this is just another area where I agree. There is room for improvement, and it comes down to educating people about why it matters.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you a lot. Thanks for the extra time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Judge. Now the chair recognizes from a former judge to a former law professor, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Actually, I'm still a law professor. I'm just on an unpaid leave of absence. So
fair enough.
If they abolish Congress, I'll have a job to go back to, hopefully. So, I wanted first thank Judge Poe for his very thoughtful comments and insights in his statement there. Thank all of you guys for your testimony. Ms. O'Connor, thank you especially for helping us in Maryland on the rape kits. We also had a breakthrough in this legislative session, which took, believe it or not, 10 years. When I got elected to go to the Maryland Senate, I had a very ambitious agenda, which included abolishing the death penalty, passing marriage equality, restoring voting rights to the former felons, comprehensive gun safety, all of these extremely ambitious big things. And then one thing which I thought would be the simplest of all, which was to deny or to allow women to petition a court to deny paternity rights to a rapist in a sexual assault. And I thought that this would just go sailing through the General Assembly. And do you know, I left the Maryland Senate having seen the passage of every one of those other things we talked about without that passing. It finally passed in this session. So the question I want to ask you, because you know, when you're in the thick of it, you can pin it on this person or that person or what have you, but to what do you attribute the difficulty of making reforms in the rape field? Why is it so difficult in so many states? I was shocked to hear about New York and the rape kits being gotten rid of after a month. I mean, that just makes no sense at all, but that's been changed too. But how do you explain this? Yes.
Thank you for the question and for your efforts on that legislation. We, on the federal level, as a note, RAIN helped pass a federal law that incentivizes states to take that action on parental rights. And as your constituent, I was very glad to see that effort come to fruition. I will say that I think, again, and I'm not trying to just softball it, but I do think it comes down to there is a delicate balancing act to be done, of which we're mindful between defendants' rights and survivors' rights. But I also think, you know, I've been at RAIN now for 5 years, and we've seen a shift in the way that we talk about these issues. We've gotten past the surface level of educating people that it happens everywhere and that it crosses all borders in terms of socioeconomic status and background and what have you. And people are digging in and getting deeper into the issues. And I do think the most successful change that we've seen has come from interdisciplinary efforts that harness the voices primarily, first of all, of survivors who are informing this from the important perspective that they carry, but also partnering with law enforcement, partnering with forensic scientists, and anyone else who has a stake in this discussion in a proactive way. Because I think a lot of times, especially when we've talked about things like statutes of limitations reform on the state level, you find out that you aren't that far apart, and this isn't unique to this issue. You aren't that far apart. There are heated beliefs and positions on either side, but ultimately, if we force the conversation when it's uncomfortable, sometimes you realize how easy it is to get to a yes.
Well, thank you, and thank you also for placing the testimony and experience of the survivors at the heart of the efforts to change things. The country has been in an uproar over the last year with the Me Too movement and the identification of hostile workplace environments and the targeting of women in the workplace. And that kind of conduct obviously exists on a continuum with sexual assault. And I'm wondering to what extent the Me Too movement has given strength to what all of you are trying to do across the country in the state legislatures.
I'm happy to take this question. Thank you so much, Member, for mentioning the Me Too movement. I think we are in an unprecedented time where change can actually happen. so often, especially young people, feel like there's activism fatigue, where there's so many issues and what can they actually do to move the ball forward? And I think that over this past year, we've seen, yes, individuals have the power within them to change their communities. Yes, even just a hashtag and sharing that they are part of a community matters. I remember my Facebook feed completely flooded with Me Too's. And I work on the issue. I know how pervasive it is, but again, this power of sharing is so important. And that directly channeled into our ability to introduce state laws in 2018 and also helped us pass these 12 laws in 2017. I know that change can be timely, but there's also never more convenient season to actually create change. And this is our moment to actually work on these issues.
Well, thanks to you and all of you for stepping forward and your intellectual toughness. Last night, I was with the young students from Parkland in Florida. Nobody wants to be identified or defined as a victim, but it is very important that we hear the witness, the testimony of people who are survivors to this, so we can all get beyond it, both as individuals and as a society. So I thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman for yielding back. Just want to note for the record before we conclude, it'd be a comfort to Ms. Jackson Lee and others that we did hear from the Department of Justice yesterday that the working group has been established. They actually had their first meeting earlier this month on February 7th, so at least that has begun. They had a meeting. I think they had various subject matter experts begin, so if that's a comfort to all of you.
Chairman, if you would yield.
Sure.
I am still going to write my letter because these are groups that are very much engaged, and even the Congress has no knowledge of the working group, no knowledge of the names, no knowledge of anything. So my letter is going to ask for the Justice Department to report to this committee its existence, its names. I assume they're not in a classified action, and that they would do a website or a public social media announcement that it exists. Therefore, maybe the members can, certainly they just started, but be able to, over a period of time, reach out to leaders like this for some personal insights that may be helpful. And I'm sure that might be their plan, but it would be very helpful if we heard that that was their plan. So
fair enough.
Thank you very much. And thank you for hearing from the Department of Justice.
Sure enough.
Appreciate that.
We're all on the same page here. See, this works together. This concludes today's hearing. Thanks to all of you sincerely for attending and for your bravery. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses and for additional materials for the record. I suspect you may have some because there are a number of members that wanted to be here and they had other meetings and things. So the hearing is adjourned.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yes, ma'am.
Add my appreciation, and I certainly would welcome the extended answer to what do you want us to get out of this hearing, because we can always improve what we're doing. Again, you are my sheroes, but you are to those women who cannot speak for themselves. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you again. Hearing's adjourned.